It was the second week of December when my mom's annual holiday text came through, same time it always did, like clockwork. Christmas dinner will be at our place this year, 6 p.m. sharp. Please bring dessert or wine. Love you. And just like every other year, I stared at the message longer than I should have, debating whether or not to respond. It wasn't that I hated Christmas. Honestly, I used to love it. I loved the quiet hum of carols in the background, the smell of cinnamon and clove, the way snow softened everything. But ever since my divorce 6 months ago, I hadn't exactly felt like decking the halls. And spending 3 hours in a room with people who treated my personal life like tabloid gossip didn't sound like the warm, festive family gathering Mom liked to imagine it was. My name's Owen. I'm 34, live just outside of Cincinnati, and until recently, I was married to a woman named Danielle. We met in college, stayed together through the job changes, the house purchase, the early career chaos, the whole picture. Until one day, that picture cracked. No cheating, no scandal, just quiet detachment and the slow, unspoken realization that we wanted very different lives. The divorce was mutual, respectful, and as clean as it could have been. But try telling that to my brother, Nate. Nate's 2 years older, and if you ever meet him, you'll know within 5 minutes. He's the kind of guy who introduces himself with a firm handshake and a humble brag, usually about his new SUV, his golf handicap, or the team he manages at work, which, as far as I can tell, consists of 2 interns and a guy named Mike who never answers emails. Growing up, he was always louder, bolder, and way more charming in that brash, punch-you-on-the-shoulder kind of way. And our parents loved it. My mom used to call him her firecracker. I was her thinker. Translation: he caused the chaos, and I cleaned it up. So when I showed up at Christmas dinner last year newly single and not in the mood for small talk, I expected a few awkward moments. Maybe a passive-aggressive comment from Aunt Lisa about how marriage is hard work, or one of the cousins asking if I was seeing anyone new yet before I'd even taken off my coat. What I didn't expect was Nate deciding to turn me into the punchline of the night. The first hour or so was mostly tolerable. My mom had decorated the dining room like she was hosting a Hallmark special. Gold-rimmed china, tall white candles, garlands wrapped around every banister. Everyone acted nice enough. I made small talk with my cousin Julia about her new dog, helped my niece tie her shoe, laughed at the usual stories Dad told even though I'd heard them 100 times. Nate and his wife, Britney, arrived late as usual, sweeping in with the breeze and the smell of expensive perfume. Britney kissed everyone on the cheek like we were all extras in a French movie and made a big show of unwrapping the dessert she brought, some overpriced bakery item in a box with gold lettering. I didn't have time to bake, she said with a fake little pout. But this has real Madagascar vanilla. Nate caught my eye from across the table and grinned. How's bachelor life, little bro? He said loud enough for a few heads to turn. I gave him a tight smile. Fine, I said. Quiet. He laughed. I bet it is. I tried not to let it get to me. That was Nate's way. He liked being the center of attention, liked poking fun when he thought he could get a laugh. I used to be able to brush it off. But something about the smug tone in his voice, like he was proud of being married, proud that I wasn't, rubbed me the wrong way. I went back to my drink, hoping that would be the end of it. But of course it wasn't. Dinner was a blur of mashed potatoes, turkey, and passive tension. Every time I thought we'd moved on, Nate would circle back. At one point, he asked if I'd thought about trying one of those apps, like I was a sad, lonely uncle who needed to be pitted. At another, he nudged my elbow and said, "Hey, at least you don't have to listen to anyone snore anymore, right?" Britney just smiled like it was all harmless fun, and Mom kept shushing him, but softly, like she didn't really mind the entertainment. I kept my cool. Barely. But by the time dessert was served, Britney's overpriced cake that tasted like sugar and air, I was ready to go home. I'd even pulled out my phone to check the Uber wait time when Nate stood up, fork in hand, and tapped his glass. All right, everybody," he said with that stupid self-satisfied grin. "I know we usually wait for Dad to give the toast, but I just want to say a few words. It's been a big year, right? Julia graduated. Britney launched her podcast. Mom finally got her kitchen remodel. And our little brother here." He turned to me, eyes twinkling with mock sincerity. "Well, he's officially back on the market. Single and desperate." Laughter rippled across the table. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Aunt Lisa covered her mouth like she wasn't sure if she should be laughing. Dad chuckled quietly. Even my mom smiled awkwardly, as if unsure whether to scold him or not. And there I was, sitting with a glass of wine halfway to my lips, feeling like the floor had shifted underneath me. That's when I said it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I just put the glass down, looked Nate dead in the eye, and said, "That's funny coming from someone whose wife just asked me last week if our lawyer was any good." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. Britney's smile disappeared so fast, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood up and left the room without a word. Nate's face drained of color. For once in his life, he didn't have a comeback. The rest of the night unraveled in slow motion. But that moment was the spark. And it wasn't just about the toast. It was about years of being the quiet brother, the second choice, the one who never made waves. And I realized something as I sat there in the awkward silence Nate had created for himself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive home that night was quiet, but my thoughts were anything but. Snowflakes scattered across my windshield like static, and my fingers tightened around the steering wheel every time I replayed Nate's smug voice in my head, single and desperate. I could still see the flicker of discomfort on Brittany's face just before she stormed out, the stunned silence that followed. The way Nate's hand had trembled slightly as he sat back down and pretended to drink his wine. He hadn't said another word to me that night. Neither had Mom, not really. She'd offered me a polite drive safe by the door, her eyes darting past me like she was already regretting inviting us both. I wasn't even angry at that point, just numb. Like I'd been running on autopilot for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be insulted to my face and actually feel it. And underneath the numbness, there was something else, something sharper. Not just resentment, not just embarrassment, but a very specific kind of clarity. Because in that moment, as I drove through the dark roads back to my half-empty apartment, I knew something had shifted. And I wouldn't, go back to pretending everything was okay. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance. No texts, no calls. I busied myself with work, spent weekends hiking, bought a few plants I had no idea how to care for. I thought maybe the silence would cool things down. Maybe Nate would apologize. Maybe Mom would check in. But the family group chat stayed quiet, except for the occasional forwarded meme or reminder that Dad's birthday was coming up in mid-January. Dad's birthday was usually a casual thing. Dinner at the house, store-bought cake, Dad telling the same joke about turning 29 again. I debated skipping it, but in the end, I went. Not for anyone else. Just for Dad. He'd always been more of a quiet observer, never one to pick sides. And even though he hadn't defended me at Christmas, he also hadn't laughed either. That counted for something. When I arrived, everyone was already there. Nate was on the couch with a beer in hand, legs spread like he owned the place. Britney wasn't with him. Instead, he was flanked by my cousin Liam and some guy I didn't recognize, talking loudly about a new investment opportunity. Mom was in the kitchen plating chicken tenders like it was a five-star entree. She looked up when I walked in and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You made it," she said. I said I would. I handed her the bottle of red wine I'd brought and stepped back, waiting for the usual awkward pause. She took it without comment, then turned to the oven, mumbling something about the rolls burning. Dinner was tense, but not in the obvious way. It was the kind of tension that sits under your skin, where every smile feels a little too forced and every question sounds like a test. Nate barely looked at me the whole time, but he made a point to bring up Brittany's absence. "She's out of town," he said when someone asked. "Needed a break." Liam snorted. "From what, your ego?" Everyone laughed, except Nate. His smile faltered for a second, and his eyes flicked toward me like he thought I'd orchestrated the jab. I didn't respond. I just kept eating my chicken tenders and pretending I wasn't watching him unravel. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for cake and gifts. Dad opened a new sweater, a book he'd already read, a box of golf balls. Then Nate stood up and handed him a large, gift-wrapped envelope. "This," he said with dramatic flair, "is something special." Dad opened it slowly, and inside was a glossy brochure, a printout of a vacation rental in the Smoky Mountains. Nate grinned. "I rented a cabin for you and Mom for a week in February. Full spa access. King suite. Mountain view." Mom gasped. "Oh, Nate." Dad looked touched, genuinely. I even felt a pang of warmth for a second, until I saw Nate glance at me out of the corner of his eye, just long enough to see if I noticed. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about Dad. It never was. This was about control, about performance, about reminding everyone who the real success in the family was. He didn't just want to be the golden child. He wanted me to know it, to sit in silence while everyone clapped and cooed over his generosity. Later, as everyone was saying goodbye, Mom pulled me aside in the hallway. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "I know your brother can be impulsive," she said, as if Nate was a toddler who threw Legos when he got upset. "But you kind of ambushed him on Christmas. That wasn't fair." I blinked. "Ambushed?" She lowered her voice further. "That comment about Britney, that was over the line. You embarrassed him." I let out a bitter laugh. "He called me single and desperate in front of the entire family. But I'm the one who embarrassed him." She gave me that look, the one I'd gotten 100 times as a kid when Nate broke something and I got blamed for escalating. That soft, tired expression that said, "Why can't you just let it go?" "I'm just saying," she whispered. "He's going through a lot. Brittany's been distant. It's been hard on him." I stepped back. "So instead of dealing with his marriage, he mocks mine for entertainment?" She didn't answer. And just like that, something cracked. I left without saying goodbye to Nate, or Mom, or anyone else. The drive home was colder this time, emptier, because now I knew, really knew, where I stood. Over the next month, things only got worse. Word got back to me through my cousin Julia that Nate had been telling people I was spiraling after the divorce, that I lashed out because I couldn't handle being alone, that I'd made up the thing about Britney just to stir drama. It was like he'd built an entire redemption arc for himself, the loyal husband who'd been publicly humiliated by his bitter, unstable little brother. But what really pushed me over the edge wasn't what he said. It was what he did. It happened at my apartment one Saturday in late February. I'd just gotten back from the grocery store when I found a white envelope slipped under my door. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, Owen, written in thick black marker. Inside was a wedding invitation. Nate and Britney. Renewal of vows. March 17th. I stared at the date for a long time, then at the gold embossed card. It looked expensive, dramatic, like something out of a bridal magazine. The kind of thing people threw when they wanted to reset after a rough patch. But that wasn't what made my stomach twist. It was the note scribbled on the back in Nate's handwriting. "Hope you can make it this time. Don't forget to bring a +1 inch." That was it. No apology. No attempt at peace. Just another punchline. Another performance. And it wasn't just a reminder that I was alone. It was a challenge. A dare. Like he wanted to see how far he could push before I snapped. Well, he was about to find out. Because if Nate wanted a show, I was finally ready to give him one. And this time, I wasn't going to play the quiet brother anymore. I don't remember dropping the invitation. I just remember looking down and seeing it on the floor, face up, mocking me from where it had landed. Renewal of vows. It read in elegant cursive, like some twisted celebration of gaslighting. Nate and Britney, recommitting to each other in front of the same family he'd humiliated me in front of, while making sure I got a front row seat. A few weeks earlier, I might have crumpled that invite, tossed it straight into the trash, and curled up with a bottle of wine and whatever half-decent movie was trending on Netflix. But something had changed. It's funny. I always thought hitting rock bottom would feel dramatic, like a breakdown or some kind of explosion. But for me, it was quieter, like standing in an empty room after a storm. The walls are still there, but something's gone. Some warmth, some illusion. I stared at that envelope for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat with it. Thought about everything. Christmas dinner. Dad's birthday. Mom cornering me in the hallway, telling me I was the problem. Nate's little smirk when he handed over that expensive trip. The knowing glance. The casual cruelty of someone who's always believed he was the main character and I was just background noise. And I realized something. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the bigger person. The one who didn't cause a scene. The one who swallowed hurt and called it maturity. And where had that gotten me? Alone. So no, I wasn't going to throw the invite away. I was going to keep it. Tape it to the fridge if I had to. A reminder. A deadline. And from that moment on, I quietly started building myself back up. First, I stopped checking the family group chat. Not just ignoring it, I left it. I didn't announce it, didn't make a scene. Just disappeared. Let them wonder. Then I got serious about my apartment. It had always felt temporary, like I was squatting in a space I didn't earn. Danielle and I had decorated our old place together, picked out furniture, argued over rugs. But this had been mine for almost half a year, and I'd treated it like a layover. So I painted the walls, got rid of the couch that sagged in the middle, ordered bookshelves, filled them with novels I'd always meant to read, hung up prints. Nothing fancy, just little things that made it feel like me. And for the first time since the divorce, I stopped walking through my door and feeling like I was waiting for something to end. Work was next. I was a UX designer for a mid-sized software company. Nothing glamorous, but solid. For months after the split, I'd been coasting, doing the bare minimum, turning off my camera during Zoom meetings, letting my coworkers carry the energy. But in March, I volunteered to lead a pitch for a new client. It wasn't assigned to me. I wasn't expected to take it, but I did, and it felt good, like stretching a muscle I'd forgotten I had. The project was for a mental health app, and I found myself caring more than I expected to. I spent late nights tweaking layouts, researching accessibility features, rewriting content until it didn't just sound friendly, it sounded real. When we presented it, the client asked to meet me personally to thank me for getting it. And that moment, that quiet recognition, it meant more to me than any holiday toast or forced compliment ever had. And then, there was April. A friend of mine, Hannah, someone I hadn't seen much since college, reached out to grab coffee. She'd seen a few UX articles I'd shared on LinkedIn and wanted advice for a nonprofit she was working with. Nothing major, she said, just a few design tweaks. We met up at a small cafe downtown, and what I expected to be a 1-hour favor turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything from typography to Taylor Swift's latest album. She was sharp, funny, direct in a way that made me feel both challenged and seen. We didn't talk about the divorce. Not then. Not really. But I told her about the vow renewal, about the invitation, about Nate's note. And instead of pity, she just said, "That's a power move disguised as sentiment. Don't give it the power." Something shifted after that. We started texting, then grabbing lunch. Then, slowly, cautiously, spending real time together. It wasn't romantic at first, just steady. A reminder that there were people who didn't define me by what I'd lost. And maybe the biggest surprise of all, I started running. At first, it was just to burn off the restless energy. I hated gyms, hated the fake motivational slogans, and the people grunting near squat racks. But running? It was simple. Shoes, hoodie, headphones, street. I started with 5 minutes, then 10. By April's end, I was jogging for 30 minutes without stopping. The weight I'd put on post-divorce started to melt off. My head felt clearer, sharper. I wasn't magically healed. I still had bad days. Days I'd stare at the wedding invite and feel that old ache, that punch-in-the-gut reminder that my family didn't see me. Not really. Days where I'd hear Nate's voice in my head and want to scream. But more and more, those days were outnumbered by better ones. Quieter victories. The kind no one toasted to. Mom reached out a few times in March. A check-in call. A forwarded joke. A random, "Do you need anything?" text. I didn't ignore her, but I didn't volunteer much either. I gave polite answers. Short responses. Enough to show I was alive, not enough to invite more. Then came the inevitable. 1 week before the vow renewal, she called. "I really hope you're coming," she said. It would mean a lot to the family. I wanted to ask why. What about this performance was supposed to mean anything to me? But I already knew the answer. To her, showing up was more important than being respected. Nate had embarrassed me, slandered me, and all she wanted was a photo of the whole family smiling in coordinated outfits. Because that's what mattered. Appearances. "I haven't decided," I said. She paused. "Owen, don't make this about the past." I almost laughed. That was rich, coming from someone who treated every family gathering like a rerun of the same broken script. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up before she could keep going. That night, I stared at the invite again. Only this time, I wasn't filled with dread. I was planning. Because while I'd been rebuilding in silence, I'd learned a few things. Like how Nate's marriage wasn't quite as picture-perfect as he claimed. Britney had reached out once, shortly after Christmas. A single message, vague and apologetic. She said she felt stuck, that she was reevaluating everything, and that she was sorry if her silence had made things worse. I hadn't replied, but I didn't delete it either. And then there was Liam, my cousin, the same one who joked about Nate's ego at Dad's birthday. He and I had reconnected quietly over drinks a few times since. Turns out, he wasn't a huge fan of Nate either. Had his own stories, his own grievances, and a deep sense of loyalty to people who didn't throw others under the bus for attention. You showing up to that circus? He asked me one night. Thinking about it, I said. He grinned. Good. Wouldn't miss it for the world. By the time the week of the vow renewal arrived, I had a suit dry cleaned, my beard trimmed, and an unexpected sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen at that event, but for once, I wasn't walking in blind. I wasn't walking in alone, and I definitely wasn't walking in quietly, because Nate had spent his whole life writing the family narrative, the loud one, the golden boy, the self-declared alpha. But what he didn't realize was that sometimes the quiet one is just waiting for the right moment to speak. And my moment? It was coming fast. The day before the vow renewal, the sky over Cincinnati looked like a movie set, clouded, heavy with the promise of rain, but holding back just enough to keep the air tense. I remember standing by my window that morning, coffee in hand, watching the wind toss the branches outside like they were agitated with secrets. I felt calm. Too calm, maybe. But there was a strange steadiness in me, like my body finally caught up to something my mind had already decided weeks ago. I'd spent nearly 3 months rebuilding, physically, emotionally, mentally, and in that time, the idea of revenge had evolved. It wasn't about humiliating Nate anymore. Not directly, at least. It was about disrupting the story he had written for himself. The one where I was just the sad little brother in the background, alone and overlooked. The one where he played the leading man in every family narrative. No, this time, I'd be the one writing the script. It started subtly. A few well-placed conversations. Quiet check-ins. I wasn't going to do anything loud. No shouting match. No drinks thrown in faces. I wanted something smarter. Sharper. I'd been talking to Liam more frequently. Partly because I genuinely liked him, and partly because he had a front-row seat to Nate's carefully curated world. One evening, about 2 weeks before the renewal, we were at this dim bar near downtown, and I finally asked him something I'd been chewing on for a while. Do you think Nate really knows how bad things are with Britney? Liam raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, she texted me back in January. After everything. Just one message, but it wasn't exactly the kind of thing a happily married person sends. He looked thoughtful for a second, then took a sip of his beer and said, Honestly, I don't think he knows anything outside his own echo chamber. I nodded. Do you think she'd talk to me again? Liam gave me a long look, then pulled out his phone. Don't ask me. Ask her. He didn't even hesitate. Just sent a text right then and there, casually letting Britney know I might be reaching out. And just like that, the last piece slid into place. The next afternoon, I met Britney for coffee. A public place. Neutral ground. She arrived in oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, like she was meeting a journalist for a scandalous interview. But when she pulled them off, she looked tired. Not sad. Not angry. Just exhausted. Like someone who'd been pretending too long and forgotten what her real face looked like. I wasn't sure you'd reach out, she said. I wasn't sure you meant it. She smiled. Touché. We sat down, and I didn't waste time. I told her I wasn't here to make things worse. That I wasn't bitter. That I didn't want to rehash what Nate said or how she reacted. What I wanted, honestly, was context. And maybe some clarity. She sighed and looked down at her latte. It's been bad for a while, she said quietly. We were already on rocky ground when he made that toast. I think part of him was trying to prove something. That he still had the upper hand. That he still looked like the guy who had it all figured out. I didn't say anything. She looked up at me. I was never angry at you. Embarrassed? Yeah, but not because of what you said. Because of what it exposed. I let her sit with that. Let it breathe. She stirred her drink. You know, the renewal was my idea. But not for the reason you think. I wanted it to be our last performance. A final act. I told myself, if things didn't change after this. I was walking away. My eyebrows lifted. Does he know that? She laughed. Nate? Please. He thinks this is a victory lap. That's when I realized. This wasn't just about me anymore. Nate hadn't just underestimated me. He'd underestimated everyone around him. Britney. Liam. Probably even Mom. He assumed the roles we played were permanent. That we were all happy to orbit around his little son. But people change. And stars burn out. The more Britney and I talked, the clearer it became. We didn't need to destroy Nate. We just needed to expose him. Let the truth slip through the cracks of his perfect image until it collapsed on its own. And the vow renewal? That was the perfect stage. We didn't hatch some big master plan. We didn't need to. All it took was a little honesty, a few nudges, some well-placed conversations in the right corners, a strategic comment, a slow reveal. Let the audience connect the dots. The next few days were quiet, calculated. I told Liam what I'd learned. He told me he'd noticed the same things. Britney growing more distant, Nate clinging harder to control. We decided to show up together. Two solo attendees with nothing to prove and everything to observe. Then I picked out my suit. It was navy, clean-cut, slightly tapered at the waist, something Danielle would have called dangerously understated. I paired it with a charcoal tie, polished shoes, and the smallest smirk I'd ever worn in public. The kind that says, "You have no idea what's coming." Hannah texted that morning. "Hannah, still breathing?" "Barely," I replied. "Remember, it's just a room full of people who've never seen you at full power." I paused, then typed, "You're coming, right?" She didn't answer right away, but 30 minutes later, she sent a photo. She was wearing a wine-red dress and heels that looked like a threat. Her caption just said, "Save me a seat." I smiled. I hadn't planned on bringing a date, but something about walking into that venue with someone who didn't come from that world, someone who only knew me as me, not as Nate's little brother, felt important. The renewal was held at this high-end event hall on the edge of town. It had fake Grecian columns, too much marble, and a fountain in the lobby that smelled vaguely of chlorine and roses. When I stepped inside, it felt like I was walking into a play mid-performance. Everything was posed. Smiles too wide, dresses too tight, laughter too loud. And at the center of it all, Nate. He was wearing a tux like he'd rented it from James Bond's personal tailor. Hair slicked back, grin plastered on like he'd been rehearsing it in the mirror. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Annoyance. I couldn't tell. But his smile didn't waver. "Look who decided to crawl out of exile," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. I matched his tone. "Wouldn't miss your big act." He chuckled like I was joking, then noticed Hannah beside me. "Oh, and you brought." "Hannah," she said, extending her hand confidently. "Nice to meet you." Nate's handshake faltered slightly. "Pleasure." I watched him clock her appearance, her poise, the way she looked me in the eye, and I knew it bothered him. Not because he cared who I dated, but because he didn't expect me to walk in with someone who didn't look breakable. We found our seats near the front. Britney was nowhere in sight. Guests trickled in. Champagne flutes were passed. Polite chatter buzzed around the room. And slowly, quietly, I began planting seeds. It wasn't hard. A whispered comment to Mom. "Britney seems nervous. I hope she's okay." A casual question to Aunt Lisa. "Did Nate ever tell you what happened the night after Christmas?" A side-eye glance during Nate's speech that made Liam snort loud enough to draw a few heads. Nothing major. Just friction, doubt, subtle shifts in the audience's gaze. By the time Britney walked down the aisle in a sleek, minimalist dress, not bridal white, but a soft silver that shimmered under the lights, the room was buzzing with unspoken questions. And then, just before the ceremony began, Britney did something no one expected. She stepped up to the podium and asked to speak. Not Nate. Not the officiant. Her. She looked radiant. Not like a woman in love, but like someone reclaiming her voice after a long silence. And when she started talking, well, let's just say the air in the room changed completely. The room fell into a kind of silence that didn't feel like respect. It felt like uncertainty. The kind of hush that happens when something's gone off script, but no one's sure yet whether it's intentional. Britney stood at the podium, eyes scanning the crowd like she was searching for an anchor. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't shaken. She looked ready. And that's what scared Nate. He had one arm lazily hooked around the back of his chair, his champagne flute resting against his leg, but his smile? It was tight. Too many teeth. His jaw twitched when Britney cleared her throat, adjusted the mic, and said, "I wasn't supposed to speak. At least, not until the vows. But I've been thinking about what a renewal actually means. And I realized, maybe it's not just about repeating words. Maybe it's about reevaluating what those words even meant the first time." A few polite chuckles, mostly from the back of the room. But I caught the glance she shot toward Nate. A quick, razor-sharp flick of the eyes. "I was 25 when Nate and I first got married," she continued, voice steady. "I thought love meant putting someone else's needs before your own. I thought it meant protecting their image, even when it came at the cost of your own voice. I believed that the more you forgave, the more worthy you became. She paused. Nate's fingers tightened on his glass. But what I've learned, Britney said, is that love, real love, doesn't ask for silence. It doesn't demand that you laugh when you're humiliated or nod when you're hurt. It doesn't show up late, drunk on praise, ready to make a spectacle of someone else's pain just to feel important. People shifted in their seats. Britney smiled gently, not at Nate, at the room. And it definitely doesn't give a speech at Christmas dinner mocking someone's divorce, then spend months gaslighting everyone into thinking he was the victim. And just like that, the air snapped. Nate's face paled, not visibly at first, but in the subtle way that only someone who knows him well would recognize, the way his lips thinned and his legs stopped bouncing. He leaned forward, half rising from his seat like he might rush the mic, but Britney held up a single hand. I'm not here to humiliate you, Nate. That's your game. I'm here to end it. She turned back to the audience. This renewal is not happening today, because I will not tie myself to a man who turns his own brother's pain into a punchline. A man who values admiration over intimacy, control over compassion, and performance over partnership. Gasps this time. Real ones. Aunt Lisa clutched her pearls. Actually clutched them, which felt almost cartoonish if it hadn't been so perfectly timed. My mom looked like someone had slapped her with a wet napkin. Liam let out a low whistle beside me. Hannah leaned forward slightly, hands folded, eyes gleaming. Britney looked straight at Nate, then lowered her voice so the room had to lean in. You've spent your whole life writing the narrative, Nate. Making yourself the hero, the winner, the showman. But here's the thing about narratives. She stepped down from the podium and walked over to her chair, her voice still calm, but resonant. They only work if the audience believes them. And today, I think you just lost them. She picked up her clutch, adjusted her silver dress, and turned toward the door. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday. And then she walked out. Just like that. No tears. No theatrics. Just power. The room didn't erupt. It simmered. Quiet murmurs. Heads turning. A few people awkwardly clearing their throats. Someone dropped a fork. And Nate? He sat there, motionless. Face blank. Until finally, slowly, he stood up. He didn't say a word. Just walked to the podium and stared into the mic like it might offer him a lifeline. Then he muttered something about technical difficulties, turned on his heel, and stormed off through the staff exit near the bar. It was glorious. I didn't move right away. I wanted to feel it. Let it soak into my skin like sunlight. My whole life, Nate had been the one in control of the narrative. He set the tone, decided who got attention and who got sidelined. And now, here he was, exposed, abandoned, humiliated in the one place he'd built as a monument to himself. And I hadn't laid a hand on him. I hadn't even raised my voice. That's what made it perfect. Over the next 20 minutes, the room began to empty out. There was no announcement, no real end, just clusters of confused guests muttering excuses and grabbing their coats. Some tried to salvage the open bar. A few relatives tried to make it about themselves. Aunt Lisa cornered me to ask if I'd known about any of this, as if I'd been hiding state secrets. I'm as surprised as you are, I lied, sipping my champagne. But I'm proud of her. Mom didn't come near me. She looked like she wanted to, like she had a speech ready. But the weight of the moment held her back. She just watched me across the room as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Eventually, Hannah slipped her hand into mine. Ready to go? More than ready. We walked out without looking back. The aftermath came in waves. 2 days later, Britney filed for divorce as promised. It made the local gossip mill, a few snarky Facebook posts from relatives who still worshipped Nate's version of events. But they were quickly drowned out by silence. Nate didn't show up to the next family dinner. Mom reached out, cautiously. She apologized in her way, not with the words I wanted, but with a long email about re-examining her own blind spots and wanting to do better. I didn't reply right away. I needed time. But the apology came. That was enough for now. Dad, ever the quiet one, called me a week later. He didn't say much. Just, son, that was something else. I saw you. Really saw you. And I'm proud. I don't think he's ever said that to me directly before. Liam and I stayed close. We grabbed beers, made jokes, laughed about how no one saw it coming, not even us. I found out later that he'd filmed Britney's speech on his phone. Not to post, not to weaponize, just to remember. Because, as he put it, moments like that, they matter. As for Hannah and me, we started dating officially 2 weeks later. It was slow, intentional, no pressure. Just two people who'd both rebuilt something quietly inside themselves and were finally ready to share it. One night, we were sitting on my couch, and she looked over and said, "You know, I think you needed all of this. Not just the divorce, not just the drama, but the pause. The moment where everything collapsed so you could see what needed rebuilding." I nodded. "Yeah, I think I did too." She tilted her head. "Do you regret anything?" I thought about that for a long moment. "No," I said finally. Because for the first time, I didn't just survive the story. I rewrote it. It's been 6 months now. Nate tried to reach out once. A vague text about grabbing a drink and clearing the air. I left it on read. Not because I hate him, but because I've finally stopped needing his validation. That was the real revenge. Not Britney's speech. Not the fallout. Not the stunned faces in the audience. It was the simple fact that I no longer lived in his shadow. I'd stepped into the light, and I stayed there. He always thought he was the main character, until the audience started clapping for me instead.